Okay. Okay. So we are ready to go at last. Okay. So today we are going to take a look at the book Platinum Communication. Subtitle is Treating Others the Way They Want to Be Treated. A little bit about the origin of these terms. There was a communication researcher by the name of Milton Bennett who popularized the term platinum rule in 1979 in some of his research. And the platinum rule was turning the golden rule upside down. Instead of saying treating others the way we want to be treated, we say treat others the way they want to be treated. And a couple of organizational specialists, Tony Alessandro and Michael O'Connor in the late 90s, then they began to popularize this term, the platinum rule, about reversing the golden rule. This author, Warren Hoffman, then coined the word platinum communication to talk about what kind of communication do you need in order to be able to treat others the way they want to be treated. So I want to take a look very quickly at the next slide. Just briefly, the background on Warren Hoffman. He has a tremendous background in theology, management, consulting, and leadership development. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he was so successful in bringing folks together in the church setting to create solutions to problems that pretty soon major corporations and other big nonprofit organizations, government agencies, they were asking him to facilitate planning with them. And so he quit the ministry after 30 years, and he did this full time up until he passed away this past year in his 80s. So we're going to take a look at what is this platinum communication all about that he talks about in the book. Okay, where's my cursor go? Okay, so this is what he says about platinum communication, meaning communication that's the best that can be, that's very effective. Communication is the foundation for relationships and teamwork. And relationships and teamwork are valuable for each of us, especially when removing barriers to creating solutions for problems. So it's a very effective way to really address major problems. So I would like to ask you, what are some of the major problems that you think we face today? And I failed to say, I want this to be very interactive. So please unmute yourselves. And there's about 13 more slides, and we've probably got about 3 to 4 minutes per slide, but I want you to be discussing the ideas that are on the slides. So what kind of big problems do we really want to solve today that you think are important? And just, let's get these out like, popcorn. A quick phrase, just speak up.
Climate change.
Excellent. Okay, what else?
Immigration rights.
Immigration rights. Others?
Equity.
Racial justice.
Racial justice, equity. These are biggies, and it is going to take a whole lot of people working together. So we're going to figure out how you can get there. So the last point about platinum communication that I want to share with you from Hoffman is that it is based on the principle, and this is the subtitle of the book, treat others the way they want to be treated, flipping the golden rule upside down. Okay, so this is what he says, that there are these 4 levels of increasing communications complexity that create the Platinum Communication Framework. And do you see my pointer, which I'm moving on the screen?
No, not yet.
No.
Not yet. Shoot. Let's see. Okay, well, look at the bottom of the pyramid. You notice I have a 1. There's one component in knowing your audience. That's the first thing you have to do. There is the next level of complexity is know yourself. And there's 2 components to that, mastering the skills in that level of communication. The next level, the 3rd level, is know others. There are 3 components in that level of communication, 3 sets of different kinds of skills. And then finally, you create at the 4th level of platinum communication, you can create, if you've worked on the other 3 levels, you can work on creating working partnerships. And there's 4 components to making these working partnerships truly blossom and do the work that you set out to do, okay? So let's go back. I'm going to deal with these 10 components very quickly, but I'm going to stop for us to, to gather your ideas. Because in Warren's book, he gives wonderful examples from his tremendous history about, examples that help you understand what he's saying, but examples of the points that he's making. Well, I believe in our group, we've got plenty of good ideas and examples that you all can give. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is that first component, number 1, in know your audience. And so I want to ask of you, if you're going to know your audience, what do you think is the first thing that you have to do?
Listen.
Listen. What and if you're going to listen, you've probably got to do some things to get them talking, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at component 1. So this is what he says about component 1, know your audience, that a respectful relationship leads to authentic communication. So as I think that was Dave Rice's voice, listen more, talk less, and begin by asking open-ended questions of the group members that you're engaging, that helps them engage in stating their needs. So what is an open-ended question? What does that mean to you?
Well,
Sorry.
it's recognizing, asking them what their main interests are or what their main feelings are.
Right, but what tells you whether you've got a good open-ended question? How do you know?
There's no yes or no answer.
Okay, there you go. There's no yes or no answer. And there's an art to asking those questions, although it's something we all can master easily. And so as they are giving out, you're asking questions and they're giving out information, you're looking for indications of their values, their beliefs, culture, and feelings. And he says that asking for their ideas embraces engagement. And that is what you want, for them to be thoroughly engaged. He tells a wonderful story about being invited to Sweden to help them plan a whole new health system. And this was quite a number of years ago. And he was asked to make a presentation. After 5 minutes, everybody was asleep. He stopped immediately. And he asked them what they wanted to get out of this session. What outcomes did they want? And immediately everybody was engaged. So one of the things he says is that there are 4 English words and one kind of open-ended question that are important to not use if you want to build trust and respect, because trust and respect is what you have to have, what you will have if you work at gaining the skills for platinum communication. So I want to take a look here. I'm not keeping up with my notes. What kind of an open-ended question do you think is probably not good to ask?
Do you agree? Fill in the blank.
Yes, that's one. But then that is not an open-ended question. That's a yes and no question.
Yeah.
How would you ask that if you were asking an open-ended question that can't be answered by yes or no?
What are your biases?
What are your biases? That is definitely an open-ended question. And you know what? Sometimes that is an appropriate question to ask the audience. Think about it. What do you think? What your biases are? There's one word you haven't used yet. And so I'm going to hold on to this, and we'll get to the one kind of open-ended question you should stay away from in constructing the questions. Okay, we're going to zip on now to component 2, know yourself. So in component 2, knowing yourself is an emotional and intellectual task, he tells us. So working at knowing what triggers your gratitude, anger, helpfulness, sadness, and responsiveness. Think about it consciously. What is it that triggers those feelings? Knowing yourself is really a daily task, he says, that never ends. And at 82, I'm really finally starting to figure out that it is endless trying to develop these skills. And so I want to ask you, can anybody who will be so brave as to offer, what kinds of things trigger a feeling of either gratitude, anger, helplessness, sadness, responsiveness? What kind of things trigger those emotions and responses in you?
Emotional bias.
Emotional bias. What does that do to you, Charlie?
It makes me feel pretty darn helpless trying to communicate.
Aha, good example. Somebody else?
Impatience.
Impatience. And are you talking about when somebody is impatient with you, how does that make you feel?
Small or not listened to.
Okay, good. You got it.
Lack of attention.
Lack of attention. When somebody's not paying attention to
Paying
you.
attention, yeah.
Okay, paying attention. When somebody is paying attention to you, how do you feel, Paul?
Well, I feel as though I'm communicating then, but if I prepared a whole bunch of material and I don't get any response, there's no indication that they're paying attention, it's frustrating as hell.
Yeah, yeah. And when they are paying attention to the point that they're going to talk about what you're teaching them, let's say if you're in a class, then you are feeling responsiveness. And you want to respond to them? Is that it?
Yes, right.
Okay, so here are these 4 no words. There are 4 English words that negatively impact your relationship with others. But, try, should, and why. Now let's hear somebody ask an open-ended question that can't be answered with yes or no, but starts with why. Who would give us an example?
Why is climate change a big deal?
Okay. Why is climate change a big deal? Okay. Somebody else.
Why would you say that?
Why would you say that? Okay, are you getting the impression that this question that these people are asking is placing some blame, is placing some shame? In the first question, maybe it's placing blame on people who think it is a big deal, commenting on their character. In the next one that Jan gave us, why would you ask that? It's, how do you think, if you're the recipient of that, how you might feel? What would be the emotion?
Defensiveness.
Defensiveness, absolutely. So when you ask open-ended questions, it is good to stick with why and how questions. Those typically do not carry with them a message of shaming or blaming. And that is the last thing you want to do if you want to really open up two-way communication. So can anybody go ahead, Dave?
You just said don't use these 4 words, and then in your instruction you said 2 words you should use are why and how.
Yes.
So did you?
I'm sorry. You should. The 2 words you should use are what and how. Okay. What and how. Thank you, David, for correcting that. Yeah. The 2 words you should use in making open-ended questions is what and how. Stay away from why. Okay. Can anybody think of about using the words but or try or should, and how you could use those words and it could convey a negative message?
Try to listen.
Yeah, try to listen. Sounds like you have very little faith in the person that they're smart enough or willing enough or good enough. Thank you. Good example. Racing right along. We're going to take a look out of the 10 components now of component 3. This is the second component of knowing yourself. And it's all about developing deep awareness. So these are the kinds of things to develop deep awareness you want to be asking yourself. What do your thoughts and values, when do your thoughts and values revert to a default pattern of behavior? I probably should have said of behavior there. And a default pattern of behavior is something that we do. But if one thing happens and we have interaction with somebody and it either is wonderful and we love it, or, you know, it's very disturbing to us or upsetting, it evokes negative emotions. All of us as human beings have default behaviors. So we then begin to behave in a certain way. So that's a default behavior. So think about that. What puts a smile, and in trying to figure out what your default behaviors are, think about what puts a smile on your face. What information do you hide from your closest friends? When do you change information to suit yourself? What do you do to influence others? What questions do you dislike being asked? What prompts passive or aggressive behavior in yourself? Okay, anybody want to share with us something that you think is probably a default behavior that you go to when something happens around you, when people say, do certain things?
When I hear someone making statements that Trump has made, I default to just blowing them off.
Yeah. And of course, once we've blown them off, we can't communicate.
Right. There's no relationship there, but I'm not sure that I can develop one anyway.
Well, you know what? If we're going to solve the dilemma of the incredible racial tensions, we probably eventually we will have to figure out a way to hear what the other side is saying. And as we move along, we can say more about that. You know, here's an example for me. When I see oppression of BIPOC people, and by that, I mean, that stands for Black, Indigenous, people of color than white, Anglo. I have become aware that this is my default behavior, that I blame white Anglos entirely. But I don't expect BIPOC people to be held accountable if they are doing something that is harmful to others. And wow, I have just really, really been thinking about this after reading Warren's book 3, 4, 5 times. It's a simple, easy, quick little read, 150 pages in pretty big print, but I pick it up weekly to think about the complicated world that I live in and the people I associate with. So that's an example for me. Anybody else want to give an example of a default pattern?
Well, responding in anger to somebody you don't agree with.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's not a good thing, but I've done it.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. So have I. As much as I abhor that habit, I did this a few weeks ago, and it took me 2 days to forgive myself and another day to write the letter of apology. And believe you me, I will think twice. I will think twice ever thereafter. This was a high stakes meeting environment. So, okay. So that's the second component of knowing yourself. We're going to march on to the what he calls component number 4, which is the first component in level 3. And this is discussing or acknowledging perspectives of others. This is really this deeper layer, this more complex layer of skills that we have to achieve if we really want to have platinum communication with a wide array of people to begin to break down barriers to accomplishing solutions to problems. So he says to us, perspective is a way of regarding a person, situation, or subject. Knowing us involves true understanding of what the other is seeing, hearing, feeling, believing. And that active listening is required as you probe deeper and deeper into the views of the other. We have to learn what their values, beliefs are. If we're going to really connect, we have to understand. Who would give us their definition of what active listening is?
Well, asking an open-ended question like, what makes you believe that the vaccine won't work?
Well, would everybody like to know the counseling definition?
Letting the other person know that you heard what they said.
Okay, there you go. Yes. Active listening refers to a pattern of listening that keeps you engaged with your conversation partner in a positive way. It is the process of listening attentively while someone else speaks, paraphrasing and reflecting back what is said, and withholding judgment and advice. Wow,
That's hard.
That is hard. That is hard. But that's what we've got to do if we want platinum communication, if we want to really get to know the other. Because if we start judging, saying, and Dave was giving us an example, I think, of something that might be judgmental. If we start being judgmental to what we're hearing and giving advice, what happens?
They don't listen.
They don't listen. They disengage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not good. Remember, Warren says that people have to really be fully engaged. When he realized nobody wanted to hear what he had to say about healthcare in America, even though he was asked to tell about that. I mean, you can imagine now, knowing how good there is in the Scandinavian countries, they either were laughing or disgusted or something. And boy, he stopped right then and he found out what it was that concerned them, what they wanted to happen in their healthcare system, what they wanted to accomplish and achieve. And then they were all engaged. People were awake. So this is really, really important to discover other people's perspectives and to acknowledge that you hear it. You hear it. You hear what they are saying. Okay.
In that regard, Jane, if you're in a meeting like the one you just described on healthcare, do you open your presentation by talking about what kind of a healthcare do you want for Sweden, which is seeking input?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's a perfect question. That is a perfect open-ended question that invites people to engage. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So marching right along in knowing others, developing the skills we need to know others. The next component 5, we're adding up from 1 to 10, which is a little confusing because we're going from levels 1 to 4. But in this level, knowing others, level 3, there are 3 components, and they are 4, 5, and 6. So component 5 is acknowledge differences without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard somebody say, so differences occur because we each care about our mindset, our values, people, or things. That's what Warren says. He says these things are as important to others as they are to you. Only their mindset and values may be very different than yours. And he says we have to learn how to show respect. We have to respect differences in others. Platinum communication calls for building trust and respect. He tells us that judgment often happens when we ask why questions. So you see why we're staying away from those why questions. Dave just gave us an example of a really good question. Could be asked of this group of healthcare workers in these agencies that was not judgmental, that was honestly asking for their input and ideas. So he asked a what question, okay, that was very open-ended, no yes or no answer to it. That invites people to share their ideas. Finally, Warren Hoffman says a non-judgmental approach is to ask an information question starting with the words what or how. So this is reinforcing, David Rice just gave us an example of a what question. And that's how we create engagement. Let me take a quick look here. I'm going to take a step out and take a little risk here with this acknowledging difference without. This is so hard, in my opinion, and I'm now in my 8th decade, and I'm just now starting to truly understand that. not able to perfectly practice it, but to understand it. Jan, would you feel comfortable sharing the example that you shared in the multicultural awareness group about when your adopted daughter, Dulce, was thinking about, there was conversation with her about her moving out to get her own apartment. And you noticed that something seemed to be wrong, and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, for about a week, she had let me know that she was thinking of getting her own apartment, and I'm like, well, good, all right, I didn't want to discourage her, but I noticed that we kept butting heads most of the week. That she was on the muscle, and I tried to figure out what was going on. Of course, I didn't ask her directly. I don't think she would have answered directly anyway, but it finally dawned on me that often in the Hispanic culture, multiple generations live together, and that family is very important. And so, I told her, I don't really want you to move out. Mm-hmm. I want you to do what you want to do. And, and I support you in gaining that independence. But I think in American culture, a parent's job is to raise an independent child, a child that can become independent. And I think in your culture, that's not the case. So I think we've had a culture clash, and she responded very well to that. I mean, that she really had wanted me to say, oh, no, really? Oh, I don't want you to go. and I didn't do that. So she was disappointed, and that's why she was thinking that I no longer loved her, and that I didn't care what she did, so it was a culture clash.
Yeah, and that's such a wonderful example of acknowledging the differences between cultures without judging, without saying one is better than the other, and because you could do that, then she could say what she really felt, what she really wanted. And I just remembered that story that you told so well, because that message was so clear to me. So we are going to move right along to components. Go ahead, Jan. Jan. Annetta.
Yes. Don't you think that that's where why questions comes in, though? The why question digs deeper into, why does that other person do certain things, or has just told you a certain thing that you necessarily don't do, or or it's not what you're usually comfortable with, or what you would not do would you be in their place? So if you do ask that why question, then they can tell you that. And you're not just traipsing in the dark, bumping into furniture there,
So Annetta, in talking to Dulce, what would be your why question?
Well, I'm not too sure what the whole conversations leading up to the it's like, yeah, I'm ready to move out, I found an apartment, I lined up furniture, that kind of thing, but it would be like, wow,
let me ask you,
why are you ready to move out? Why, don't you like it here?
She would have liked that. She would have liked that. But if I said, why are you so on the muscle, why are you so unhappy this week? Which was what I wanted
Oh,
to
no,
ask her.
yeah, that would be then a judgment.
That
would be a judgment, yes.
Exactly, and that would put her on the defensive.
Right. That would be like a judgment question for sure. Yes.
So I think
see that. Yeah.
I think here's the rule, Annetta, and you ask a good question. If you're going to ask a why question, before you ask it, does it infer that there's something wrong with the other person, something wrong with what they're thinking? So, you know, there may be times where it is legitimate to ask a why question, but really think before you ask it. It somehow suggests that the other person is doing the wrong thing, or there's something wrong they're doing because they have a different set of values, etc. So I think, I'm glad you raised this. This is a good question to raise. This is, and as Warren says, this is complex, getting these levels of communication. Okay, so we're going to look at.
I have an example.
Yes, go ahead.
Let me mention that as a coming from a scientific background, I'm always asking why. And I see, to me, it's hard for me to see these emotional responses if I'm asking why of a person instead of a system.
Yes, I relate to that, Charlie, because my initial background was chemistry and mathematics. And I relate that, but I have actually learned that sometimes I do real damage when I ask those questions, because, you know, especially people who will tell me later, well, let's say in the university, I feel overshadowed by you. You know, when you say something like that, I feel like you're saying, you know, you're superior to me, or you've got the right answer, etc. So in personal relationships, I think we need to be clear that this is different than science when we're trying to lend evidence to a hypothesis or knock down the null hypothesis. And so that's important. This is a good question, because there's a difference between personal relationships and getting to build trust, you know, building trust and respect, and you know, testing math or science hypothesis. Good question. Yeah. Okay.
I have an example I wanted to give.
Yes, Kalani, please.
From my the book I wrote on working with BIPOCs, Jumpstart Your Allyship, on how to understand differences. And I gave an example of being with a guy who I knew was going to have a different perspective from me about the riots in DC, or the peaceful protests in DC, because the guy I was talking to was from Oklahoma and I lived in New Mexico. And he lives in a part of this country that I knew was fairly conservative. So I wanted to hear what his perspective was on that. So I asked a question I thought would be non-defensive. And I said, well, what are people saying about the protest yesterday? And that's a what question that I thought would kind of open up the door for more perspective, versus something like, why do people here feel they're against the protest? So with the what question, he was kind of gave him some room, and it wasn't personal.
Yes, I love that example in your book, Kalani, and your book, Survival Guide for Black UUs. You demonstrate a whole lot of things that are parts of this platinum communication. So that's a really excellent example of why the why question would have absolutely probably put that guy on the defensive, but the what question opened up connection, a conversation. Yeah. Okay. I'm moving right along to components. This is the third component in knowing others. This is about using the language of others. That it's important to use the language of others if you really want to communicate. And of course, if you're going to this goes back to the active listening. You would have to have listened to them enough to understand their language and what is meaningful to them, what communicates with them. So this is what Warren's: take responsibility for ends of a conversation, speaking and listening. Ask people to clarify when their words seem ambiguous to you. And that's what we've been doing today in this conversation. We've had a number of really good questions asked to clarify. Use a person's words to state their point back, to see if you are following properly. When you are speaking, ask regularly whether they are understanding what you are saying. This one, would anybody like to, kind of give an example of how you might, if somebody's talking, really don't understand what to say, what you might say in order to get clarification?
I just want to respond that I have a hard time dealing with a hardcore Trump supporter because I know what they're going to say.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have
so
any?
I don't know how to follow this instruction when they're just going to come back and, I don't want to use their language.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Anybody have an idea? If Paul is having a conversation with a supporter, if they initiate a conversation,
right,
and he does not want to use the language that they used, what would be an open-ended question that he asked to connect? Wouldn't be judging them for their position where they're at, because you know what? There are lots of people who've had such different life experiences that they think that very firmly that this is the person who cares about me. So what would be a good question for Paul to ask? Think hard. Well, this is a.
I believe it is.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it really comes down to one thing about that is what Paul says, that what makes Trump so powerful is that he does understand the use of others' language. He's a master at using other people's language. I think what might help you, Paul, with someone like that, because I've done this a number of times, is to ask something from a place of curiosity, such as, tell me, what about the Make America Great Again slogan appeals to you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
that is a great example that creates connection. And then you will begin to learn probably about this person's background and why they feel the way they do. And once we begin to do that, we can really begin to develop some strong partnerships. We've only got 10 minutes and 5 slides to go. So I'm going to move us along. I thank you for your great ideas and discussion here, because it makes this meaningful. Okay, so now we're at level 4, where we now have learned enough about our people in the group. We have looked deeply at ourselves and learned about ourselves, our own biases, default behaviors, emotions that we feel. We have looked at the other person and tried to understand them and what brings them to where they're at without judging. I love what Kalani said about Trump is a master at connecting, because he has taken time to figure out what it is that they relate to. So if we have built up these skills, then we're ready to create working partnerships. But to do this, there's 4 important components. The first one is component 7, create a space of comfort and safety. Comfort, Warren says, is a powerful word, meaning with strength or strengthen to produce physical ease. Now, when comfortable, he says that we become open, caring, and sharing. A place of comfort is a place of safety, and we communicate in a comfortable, trusting, and safe environment. This is what we have to get all of these ideas out. And then he says, interestingly enough, in this sentence, he uses the word Trump's small case, but he says, trust trumps fears, which are always lurking. All of us have some fears. I wish we had several hours to discuss this, because I would love to ask you about those things. But since we don't have several hours, I would like to ask, what are some of the things that you feel for you creates a space where you're comfortable? What is happening?
A feeling of being understood.
Okay. Wow. And if you're practicing those things at level 3, you will get that feeling that you're understood. Thank you, Charlie. These are things that we could think for a long time about. Because of the time and knowing that the bell will ring, is there one more person who could tell us something that creates a feeling of safe space for you?
I have a fellow that I golf with, but he also was a farmer, and I grew up at a farm. And immediately we seem to have a trust relationship no matter what we talk about, purely because our similar background.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to connect with somebody with similar background. The bigger challenge is, how do we get comfortable with somebody who doesn't have the same background, doesn't share our values, as Paul was saying. That is where it really takes a lot of work. Okay, I'm going to whip on to component 8 of creating working partnerships. And this is all about practicing emotional intelligence and empathy. And Warren Hoffman says, emotional intelligence is how you handle relationships with others. Since you show sincere interest, it's your language, your tone of voice, and your body language. So it isn't just the words that come out of your mouth, all that body language and the intonation. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Now, when people are so very different and have such a different experience, we have to really, really work, I think, on that one. The purpose of listening is understanding. So this brings us back to active listening, where we're confirming to the other, this is what I think I heard you say. Is this right? Am I understanding? And finally, he says, when you are understood, or when you understand another person, you make a connection. That was what Ami was doing with the man from Oklahoma there in Washington. He was making a connection. He was showing him he was interested in understanding what he thought about what happened, what his place inspired. Okay, moving right along to yes, David, go ahead.
A number of folks have mentioned the past president, and the word empathy, which is in your component 8, You mentioned that as being a lot of positive things, yet if I'm criticizing Mr. Trump, one of the things that I focus on is the lack of empathy, yet in the sense of his communication skill, which XK mentioned, for example, there's a certain, obviously he being Mr. Trump has a strength there, but when it comes to interpersonal sympathy portrayed in language, body language, facial expressions, that doesn't come through to me. So maybe I'm just not speaking his language.
That is entirely possible. And that's a very thoughtful question about, how with somebody so very different, how do we feel empathy? I just like to share real quickly an experience that I have had in the past year with a person who is a BIPOC person and who did a very cruel thing to a person within her own culture. And I absolutely was filled with anger. But fortunately, I was in a position in an organization that technically and legally, I could not really go sit down and talk to her at the moment about that and be following protocol. I did engage two people from her culture to have loving conversations with her about what had happened. And when we were together working on a task, a committee, the one thing I did do is I knew she had had a terribly painful experience in her as a young adult. And I asked her to tell me about that in depth. And when I heard the circumstances, when I heard what happened, when I saw the deep pain when she lost this person she loved so very much, who was gunned down by the military in her country at that time, I felt enormous empathy, and I understood for the first time why she took a particular approach to dealing with a person who was disagreeing with her on an issue that was deeply important. And I was actually able to stop judging. It doesn't keep me from continuing to advocate for behavior that I think is right and just, but I felt this incredible empathy as she told the stories, and the tears stuck in her throat to the point where she couldn't continue to speak. So sometimes we think when people do the most despicable thing, or even that people are despicable, there are ways that if we begin to learn about their experiences, that we can begin to have great empathy. Makes me think of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Okay, rushing right along to component 9 of creating working partnerships. Most of us are born of parents and teachers who tell us what to do. Warren says, do this, do that, et cetera, et cetera. He believes that something which is called educare, and it comes out of the education world, is very important. He points out that master teachers who first know and then tell only if there are gaps. That's what they do. They ask us what we know. If there are gaps in our knowledge, then they help fill those in. And so that's another way of showing respect for what people know and listening to how they have created their own knowledge. And so this is why methods for strategic planning that focus on getting the answers from the participants and checking for where the alignment is among these ideas is so successful. The Institute for Cultural IFCE. The Institute for Cultural Engagement is an organization that has worked in 100 countries around the world doing community development. And they get great results because they come together and ask what people want to accomplish. They get that agreement. They put people into small groups where their voices are heard and they get their ideas out. Then they bring people back together to share these ideas and look for the alignment that gives them the ideas about what they need to do to move forward to solve a difficult community problem and to make things better. The last slide, the last component of creating working partnerships is create collaborative partnerships. He points out that partnership enhances cooperation, connection, and collaboration, that partnerships are not established to fix others, that you come together in partnerships to try to solve problems, to eliminate the barriers. Once you have that kind of deep communication, barriers begin to actually dissolve on their own. He says that the camaraderie established in a serious and sincere partnership results in compacts that are difficult to break. So partnerships are built on trust, mutual respect, and goodwill. And if we work at these 3 levels of developing these platinum communication skills, we can get to the place where we can develop these partnerships to tackle big issues, big problems. I want to say, in closing, I want to give an example of this. All of you, I'm sure, know Melinda Gates and the Gates Foundation. She wrote a book called The Moment of Lift. It is a phenomenal book. And she is a person, she and Bill, but I give much of the credit to Melinda, have over the last couple of decades built strong partnerships with every kind of group you could think of around the world, with the purpose for empowering women. And I wish I could had time to share with you all the statistics. That's a whole nother subject about how things have changed, about eliminating poverty for families, about improving health for families, about eliminating so many mothers in the millions and billions actually from dying around the world in childbirth because of some of the actions they've been able to take as the result of not going out and trying to do it by themselves, but building these strong partnerships where everybody has contributed to eliminating some of the barriers. And this is what she says in the book, The Moment of Lift. When you examine old practices to take out bias and add in empathy, everything changes. Everything changes.
It's a little like the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee going to St. Kitts to work with the people there and recognizing that it's such a big part of their culture that you're not considered a man or a woman as an adult until you have a child. Mm-hmm. And so, and overpopulation was becoming a major problem in St. Kitts. So they went in not with the intention of changing that value, but of saying, yeah, go ahead, have that first child, but then don't have any more for a while. And educating them on how not to have more for a while and the value of that. And that worked. If they had gone in and said, postpone having children, when that's how you prove yourself to be an adult, it would not have worked.
That's a wonderful example, Jen. And she talks about in the book how they used local leaders who had the trust of people or were able to gain the trust of people to develop, to get families and husbands to give up the bias about birth control. And that this has been critical, allowing women and families to decide on the timing and how many children and the timing in between, so that we don't have the children, this huge group of children starving, malnourished, and the mothers dying in the next child that finally becomes too many. And it has made a huge difference in the health and well-being of people all over. But you have to work with your local leaders who can build trust to help people give up a cultural bias, all the while showing them the empathy that you feel for how hard these decisions are, these changes are to make.
Could you put the quote back up, Jan or Jane?
Sure. Let me get my PowerPoint back up. Are you seeing? Let's see. I got
the Melinda Gates quote that you gave.
Yeah, the Melinda Gates quote. Let's see. You know what? Can I read it to you?
That'd be fine.
Our wonderful tech assistant today just made this possible to do this right, but I'd have to get it back up with her. Okay, so here's the quote. Here's the quote, and I'll repeat it slowly and a couple times. When you examine old practices to take out bias and add in empathy, comma, everything changes.
What I was looking at was the part around bias, which came through garbled at that point. Sorry.
Okay. Let me say it again. When you examine old practices to take out bias and add in empathy, there you go, everything changes.
Okay, the reason I asked was, my reaction was, why don't you just simply say without bias? But then the discussion that followed was more along the lines of acknowledging the bias in another person, like the situation with the childbirth situation, where the bias of the person is to favor having a child to show that you're an adult. So you, being the outsider, empathizing, would say, I accept your bias and I'll work with it.
That's true.
But you're not really taking out the bias.
You don't pass judgment. Definitely, as the outsider, you don't pass judgment. But what you do is you help cultivate natural leaders who can help those people discover their bias so that they can give it up. They can take it out. And she gives tremendous examples in this book, The Moment of Lift, about how these people help people. It's the same thing as us. You know, let's say that our bias is that there can't possibly be anything too smart or moral about a person who would go out and vote for Trump. Now, you know, I honestly, and I'm being honest about this, I just know that even though that's what I sometimes say, I know these people, and they are not good, and they are not immoral either. And so I have to really listen to them to figure out what is making them attracted to this person, and why are they accepting what he has to say? When Obama was the first Obama campaign for presidency, my neighbor, Bill Donawa, who is a Black man from New York, the two of us canvassed together, and they sent us into neighborhoods that we knew had a considerable prejudice against a Black person being president. And I have never seen such incredible communication as Bill made, and connection with these people by just asking them all kinds of questions. And when they began to talk about their values and what they wanted and what was important to them, he said, well, you know that this is something that Obama is proposed to relate. We're talking and ready to go in a neighborhood where people didn't want to know how they were living. They said, they would say to Bill, I didn't say I'm not going to vote for him. I just didn't say I was going to vote for him, but I didn't say I'm going to vote for him. In those neighborhoods, which we knew already there was a considerable bias for Obama, they did turn out and vote in large numbers for him. And this is what Obama had his field workers do, is train how to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People were persuaded.
Yeah. Yeah, you saw it in action. Thank you.
I saw it in action. And I could not believe this was a man who had experienced huge discrimination growing up as a child. He was older than I am, which is really old. and you know, so he remembered the worst of the worst. And here he was, so empathetically having conversations and asking to know them and what they thought. And he persuaded them.
One thing Obama said is that when he was training to be a grassroots community organizer, the first thing they taught him to do was not to go out there and try to give a message, but just go out there and meet people and just get to know them and, you know, figure out who they were and know them on a human level. Forget about trying to politic or persuade them, but just to see who they were, let them know who, and let them know him too. So really about listening.
Yes. And Bill just demonstrated that. They connected with him because he did that. I mean, this is just, Kalani has really pointed out, this is how platinum communication works. This is really what Obama was doing. He taught all the field people, and you know, there were probably many of us on this call were involved, and we went through lots of training and meetings at the precinct level and figuring out how we would have these conversations, creating these snowflakes, us going out one flake and attracting other flakes to create lots of snowflakes.
I just think as I read Platinum Communication, Jane, that Warren has kind of an, I don't know if she has a natural ability. He does seem to have a gift of telling stories and communicating. I think some people just have they may be born with a human instinct for warmth and conveying their ideas and connecting without much effort. And then they also have the gift of teaching people how to do it. So I think he has come into the world with this ability. My ex-wife, she's deceased now. She was the most intuitive person that I met, and she could meet a person and within 30 seconds be able to size them up and just take them off their defenses in a way I just couldn't even believe half the time I saw it. But I think something about, I don't know if her training as an attorney or just her ability, the way her brain worked, was that she was able to just do that the way I think Warren communicates it. And I think that some people have that gift. The rest of us have to kind of struggle through it like me.
Me too.
Well, I'm one of those who struggled for a long time. And so I can really appreciate what you're saying. And it just, I mean, this is a well-known book now, even though it was published in 2020. It can be bought for $12.10 paperback at Barnes & Noble. My brother was a friend of Warren and Hoffman, and I think that he would agree with you. When he finally decided to stop being a minister and just do this, he made lots of money, and he used that money to give it away. He and his wife, they had an agreement to do things for people in communities where that people needed resources, no matter what it was, you know. And so there is this kind of very, he was just a very humane person. But he also was a German, of German descent. And, you know, he said, especially in communicating with his wife, you know, he had a lot of love to not be cocksure of what he knew, and opinionated. And he looked at very quickly that was a good way to turn people off and cause them not to engage. And, you know, so I think that what you're saying, he was a very intuitive person. He learned fast. He analyzed his own behavior to see how it was affecting other people.
Yeah, Tamara does that too. She has a good way of warming up to people kind of in a split second. We met this guy last week in Texas who had a 4-year-old grandson with him. The guy was a probably 75-year-old white man, but he had a 4-year-old BIPOC grandson, and she hit it off with that kid in less than 5 seconds, I swear. And that guy just kind of fell in love with both of us. And believe it or not, he and I connected, and we have talked almost every day since then. And it sounds like we just realized we had a real good chemistry. It was just a natural chemistry that allowed us to, you know, get to know each other pretty deeply, pretty fast. But I think it's the initial spark that Tamara had just to put them on at ease and make them feel comfortable, as you said, along with Warren, created comfort for all of us. And we just felt almost like a natural family. Well, not a natural family, but a family of strangers that became intimate pretty quickly.
This has been just great. I'm absolutely amazed at the participation. We're considerably over time, but is there anybody else who wants to offer a comment? Okay, well, thank you very much, Jane. This has been excellent.
Well,
let's give her a hand. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. I want you to know that it is our church that inspires me to keep moving forward, and the work that has been happening in the last couple of years around dismantling racism that has made me feel that it is worth trying to learn these skills. When I think the world is hopeless, then I come to a meeting. I come to the Multicultural Awareness Group or the 8th Principle Group or to the Social Justice Committee meetings, and I think, no, the world isn't hopeless. There's a reason to keep going forward.
Thank you, Jane.
And thank Paul, you want to mention?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
I'll mention next week we're going to have Peter Goodman will be our guest speaker, and he's going to talk about what's our current condition of our democracy, and can it survive the polarization that we have? So it should be a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, wow. Good follow on to this.
Yes, it is.
Wow. Should it survive?
And so, you know, I asked him about 3 weeks ago, and he readily agreed to do it. So I was very pleased.
Great. That is great. Should be wonderful.
So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
See you next week.
Thank you, Jane.
Oh, you're welcome.